Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Inc., New York's Window Company, Capital One Bank, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding for this program is made possible by grants from AVR Realty Company, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Beechwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman & Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, F.J. Siami Construction, Friedman LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors LLC, Investors Savings Bank, Jack JAFFA and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackel Realty Services, M&T Bank, Marcus and MILLICHAP Real Estate Investment Services, Meridian Capital Group, The Moynihan Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans LLP, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling Inc., Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, The Witkoff Group.
Hello, my name is Michael Stoller. You know, New York City is a conglomeration of buildings, environments, programs, and they're interesting people in New York. It's very appropriate that the picture behind me is centering on Lower Manhattan. And today I have a very interesting young lady who lives, works, and operates in Lower Manhattan. Elizabeth Berger, the president of the Alliance for Downtown New York, which is the largest business improvement district. Now, Liz, you were supposed to be born in Mount Sinai Hospital, and what happened?
Well, I wanted to do it my way, and I came early. In fact, I was born at camp in Cold Spring, New York.
At a Federation camp?
Yes.
Now, so after camp, you and your parents went back. Now, your dad was working for the Federation, and your mother was as a clinical psychologist. And you came back and you went to Parkchester, one of the MetLife large developments. And then you came to Manhattan, but as opposed to going to Stuyvesant Town, you went to Gramercy Park, right?
Right. Well, as you know, at that time, it was a period of great migration. My parents made the big move to Manhattan, but of course they were driven by the schools. They were driven by the schools and the idea of a great building. And they waited many, many years to find the right building and the right school, and they found it. But I think, looking back, I'm probably the only person ever to wish they didn't live in a pre-war apartment building with a fireplace, but rather be in Stuyvesant Town, because it's where the kids were.
Right, but you know, it wasn't that far. I mean, you were in Gramercy Park. Stuyvesant Town was a couple of blocks away. You went to the public school where Stuyvesant Town, where everybody went, PS 40.
I did, right across the street.
And, you know,
I sold Girl Scout cookies in Stuyvesant Town in Peter Cooper.
Now, interesting story. Well, I'm not sure. Is that when you started being in the catering business also?
Well, that's when I started being in the party business.
In the party business, right, at the age of 10.
At the age of 10. Well, and I think the takeaway there is that I've always worked, and I've always looked for an outlet, for a creative outlet for my skills, sometimes a little counterintuitively.
So you go to PS 40, which would have put you, and then you said to me the interesting situation is if you stayed in New York City, you would have probably been at Stuyvesant High School.
Well, this was a big issue. My parents were big believers in public education, and to my father, the great achievement would have been for me to be the first girl at Stuyvesant. Of course, that didn't happen, and many, many women followed me. The issue was moot, however, because in the beginning of high school, we moved, as you know, first to Buffalo, New York, and then to Providence, Rhode Island.
Buffalo, New York, wonderful, warm area, you know, buildings, everything is in in serious problems in Buffalo. You spent about a year or 2 years?
3 years in Buffalo, a lot of snow.
In Amherst?
In Amherst, yeah.
And then you moved up to Providence, where your mother is today.
Yes.
So at Providence, over there, the Girl Scout cookie salesperson, the children's games party planner, what did you decide? You said Providence was near Brown. What were your thoughts? Because you could have gone to Brown. You went to another space, Yale. How did you decide on Yale?
Well, I think like as many high school seniors faced with a very big decision and kind of no sense of what it really meant, I looked to what the different colleges pitched. And I didn't necessarily believe any of it, but I liked the Yale pitch. And it was both close enough to home and far enough away from home. And remember, having moved to Providence, Rhode Island in 1977, that's the year that Saturday Night Fever came out. We all knew it was fiction. In Providence, they thought it was a documentary. I was ready for anything.
So you go to Yale, you have 4 years. So let's talk a little bit about those Yale years.
Well, Yale is an extraordinary place. It's got incredible history, but at that point, particularly, it was very focused on the future. Kingman Brewster had been president in the 60s and the 70s, and he had been very open to the students in a way that previous administrations hadn't been. There had been the Panther trials in New Haven, and my class, and as you know, my husband is in my class came in with a new president, Bart Giamatti, who most people know as having been commissioner of baseball, but at that time he was a Renaissance scholar who became the president. And I was very, very taken by something he said before he started, which is, I'm not coming in on a white horse, but I do have a yellow Volkswagen. And I think the point of Bart Giamatti, and he was an incredible spokesman for free speech at a time when speech was really being constrained, was that the university was a place where anybody could do anything that they wanted the way they wanted to do it, with kind of structure and safety and excitement. And that was Yale.
Now, in your senior essay, what was it on?
I'm probably the only person in the history of Yale College to have a senior essay that was put in a lockbox. I wrote my senior essay about Italo-American politics in Providence, Rhode Island. I thought that I would write a piece about the mafia, but as I started to do my research, I realized that that really wasn't the issue. The issue was why new Americans, Italo-Americans, voted together, acted together, and continued, sometimes with, sometimes against their own best interests, to support Italo-American candidates.
So you graduate Yale, and what do you do?
Well, I wanted to get back to New York, having been in the diaspora, so to speak, for a long time.
Speaking about that, I failed. You did do some digs, right? You did go to Israel before?
Oh, I did. I worked on an archaeological dig the summer after my freshman year and helped find a Roman forum and a lot of what's called lubware, late ugly Byzantine. But I wanted to get back to New York, and I applied for a fellowship with the city of New York. Ed Koch was the mayor. He had been my councilman and then my congressman when I grew up. He was an impressive figure, an impressive leader. And so I went back to New York. Friday, I left the mayor's office in Providence, where I had been working for the summer. Monday, I started with Ed Koch.
And you spent, what, 7 years there?
Well, I was on a nine-month fellowship, and I looked up 7.5 years later, and I had spent a quarter of my life helping to represent Ed Koch at the City Council.
And we were talking before that there were certain programs that you were very proud of.
Well, it was an exceptional opportunity to work with Ed and with the people in Ed's administration, group of really talented, iconoclastic people who are very passionate about the city and urban life. And it was a time when legislative program was really moving on the city, state, and federal level. So for me, someone in their 20s, to actually be able to work on gay rights legislation, on legislation to integrate private clubs, on smoking restrictions. It was incredibly powerful to actually see government in action.
Interesting question. You went to Yale College. Was Yale College, the Yale Club, had that situation?
I'm trying to think. The bill did cover the Yale Club, but the Yale Club admitted women. You know, it's very interesting. I was in only the 10th class at Yale to admit women, and one of my sisters-in-law was in the first class of women at Yale, and the difference in just that decade was remarkable. But you know, what was very interesting about being in the Koch administration is that I had been very involved in politics in Rhode Island. I mean, it's practically a religion. And I was involved in politics in New York as well, and that was not, most people in the Koch administration were not. So being in the legislative office really was an opportunity to take the substance and the action and put them together.
So now you decide, you finish with the Koch administration, you decide to become an attorney?
Well, I think it was the great punt. I think it was when you don't know what to do, go to law school. And
you could have gone back for an MBA.
As I said, I've tried to figure
your
out
mother
how
might
to
have
use
been
my
happy.
skills.
Your mother might have been very happy, you know, become a clinical psychologist. I mean, you had spent all the time in politics. You know, you had enough exposure on the psychology of people.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I often say, and as you know, I was both a lobbyist in government and out of government for many, many years. I always say you bring to the table what you know, and for me, a lot of it is psychology. I think if I had given some thought to it, I might have done any one of a number of things, but I didn't, so I went to law school.
And you know, you like being in New York, but all of a sudden you said, I want to be a California dreamer. And you went to UCLA.
I actually went to
USC.
I went to USC at a very interesting time. USC was trying to rebuild its law school as the Yale of the West. And one of the reasons that I went to law school was in some ways to reclaim the intense intellectual experience that I only selectively had in college. And so I went to SC, and I was fortunate to have an extraordinary range of professors. And I actually liked being in school. But
So what happened? It was 6 months, one semester?
I kind of looked up and realized it wasn't about the classes, it was about the exams, and I really just didn't want to be there.
So you could have stayed in California.
Well, my boyfriend, who's now my husband, was here. And of course, I like New York. I mixed the action.
So now the interesting situation, you come back to New York City, you knew most people in the Koch administration, and you get a job with a guy from the Koch administration who happened to not know you.
Right. Well, I think the issue is more that I didn't know him than he didn't know me. You know, I came back after law school. It was right after the election. Dinkins was the new mayor. I think many people thought I had just been on the campaign. Others thought that 3 years had passed very quickly. But the great irony for me is I went to work for Gordon Davis at Lord Day & Lord. The great irony is that when I left law school, the dean of admission, who didn't want me to leave, said, "Where will you go? What will you do? Who will ever hire you?" And the answer was, as you know, for almost 20 years, very exciting and important law firms that probably never would have hired me as a summer associate from USC.
Very interesting. It's true. So you go to work with Gordon, and Gordon had a very interesting law practice. But part of it, and I think this really sculptured to what happened later on, that you're at the Alliance, is you got involved with some major New York City projects for nonprofits and governmental agencies. Let's talk about some of those.
Well, Gordon was the co-head of the real estate department at Lord Day & Lord, and he focused on the public development side. And many of the projects that he worked on required city and state approval. I first got involved teaching the lawyers in the real estate department what the charter meant. And then, as time went on, the new charter, in '89 there was a new charter, I started applying it. So we represented major nonprofit institutions, among others, that wanted to build, wanted to expand. The community wanted it, the community didn't want it. We engaged kind of public interest in co-funding these projects. We helped fight litigation, went through the
but there
public
are always,
review.
I mean, there are certain projects that you remember in your lifetime. And one of them, you know, one of the major projects that you and Gordon were involved with was Lincoln Center.
I represented Lincoln Center for many, many years and helped kind of advance the center's goals from renaming, I think it's 65th Street, Lenny Bernstein Way, to funding and public review on the redevelopment project, which Ren Levy is now leading in such an extraordinary way. Also was very involved with Jazz at Lincoln Center from the time it started as a 3-concert series to the creation of Rose Hall. That was incredibly empowering and exciting to work with Winton, Gordon, Diane Coffey, others at Lincoln Center, Nat Leventhal.
You were also talking about the museum, the American Museum.
The American Museum is a very special place for me. I started working as a consultant to the museum when it had its first professional president, George Langdon, and to work with that museum as it moved from kind of the old guard standard of a very closed institution to the 21st century degree-granting educational institution that Ellen Futter has built was just extraordinary. Of course, the most visible sign of that is the planetarium and North End project that opened for the millennium. But the dinosaur halls, the library, the creation of after-school programming, all very exciting, important work.
So you spend, let's fast forward. You're in all these projects, and it's 2001. And a very interesting, now, before that, you got involved with the Alliance as a member of the board, but we'll get back to that. But let's talk about 9/11, because I think that was a day that
well, it changed my life.
Changed your life.
Changed my life. Well, I don't know how to tell the story most dramatically, except to say that I live across the street and had just walked over the plaza to take my daughter to school on the 4th day of kindergarten. I was standing outside the fence of our local public school, complaining to one of the fathers that I'd never get to know 56 parents in the kindergarten class, when all of a sudden I looked up and I saw a plane. And I couldn't remember if planes flew that low, but it really didn't matter. My conversation was much more important. And I went back to it, and then 45 seconds later, everybody in the line, there were about 30 of us, all of a sudden realized, and we ran into the school. And it set off a chain of events that day and going forward that really changed my life. They changed my professional life, they changed my civic life, and ultimately brought me to the Alliance.
Now, you changed companies also in 2001. You go to work with Claudia.
I did. Claudia Wagner represented Ed Koch in Albany, had been at Shea and Gould, and in 2001 had a small boutique that focused on city government relations and regulatory issues downtown. I was working at Lincoln Center in 2001, starting at their government and external affairs department. But I kind of had one of those life is too short moments. I didn't have a home. We were out of our home for 4 months. I didn't have a phone. My children didn't have a school. My husband, who's a writer's work, was locked up in our apartment. But what I thought about hour after hour, day after day, that fall was what has happened to our community. It was never a question of will we go back. It was always how will we go back? We helped build this community, we'll rebuild it. I was already on the community board, as you know. I was very involved in a bunch of civic and community organizations, and I decided that I really wanted to concentrate my life in the little village of Lower Manhattan, much more synergistic. So I went to work with Claudia rebuilt the practice that I had had before I went to Lincoln Center, and my life was 100 numbers on Broadway between the office and home, a little detour for the school.
So now you're sitting as a member of the board, and one day you decide to throw your head in the ring into your hat into the ring.
Well, you know, the Downtown Alliance was in many ways the last of one of David Rockefeller's kind of visionary civic institutions to advance Lower Manhattan. Its founding chair, who's still our chair, Bob Douglas, been very involved in Lower Manhattan, in government, in business, and our founding president, Carl Weisbrod, kind of redefined what economic development meant and had just an incredible vision for Lower Manhattan. After Carl left, Eric Deutsch came in, he left. I saw an opportunity to really put all the pieces together and to bring what I knew from, at that point, almost 25 years in and around government and politics, incredible commitment and passion for the community, and an interest in community building, which...
Let's talk a little bit about the Alliance, because people know, they think of business improvement districts, and I think the Alliance is different. You know, you have buses that you take people around. You know, it's very busy now, especially with the rebuilding of the Trade Center site, and it's the largest visitor site in New York. More people go downtown, and that's in your market. And you see activity when you go down to the Alliance. It's a different thing. You don't see that in the bids. The bids, you know, you see different type of things. They're always there. Maybe they're people, you know, wearing the Alliance jackets more. I see them more active. So
well, in deference to my colleagues in New York's 65 other bids, I think bids are doing an extraordinary job, and different communities require different levels of presence, experience, and focus.
I think
Sometimes I wish we could focus on just one thing.
I think what the real situation is, many bids really don't have a live-work element.
Well, here's what we have. Lower Manhattan is geographically distinct. We're surrounded by water on three sides and by a very clear boundary, Chambers Street. We were created, as you know, in the mid-90s with the idea of saving the commercial market in Lower Manhattan. And one of the visionary ideas came out of the Lower Manhattan Plan in '93 and the Downtown Lower Manhattan Association was the idea of encouraging a residential community. Now let's stop. In 1970, Earth Day, less than 1,000 people lived in Lower Manhattan. In 1982, when I moved down there, when I went to work for Ed, about 10,000. When the bid started, 14,000 people lived in that 1 square mile, and the idea was that creating a residential community would do two things. One, it would take obsolete, Class C commercial space off the market through conversions, and two, that residents would create the critical mass necessary for the kinds of amenities that commercial tenants want. And that was successful. So by 9/11, there were 22,000 people who were living below Chambers Street. Huge success. Now there are 55,000. And that has had a tremendous impact on the market. We just did a residential survey that we're getting ready to release that shows that more than 40% of the people who live in Lower Manhattan walk to work. And of course, 90% of the people who work in Lower Manhattan either walk or take public transportation. That is an incredible amenity. But back to the bid. We certainly are a bid. We're a tax assessing nonprofit. Our core mission is to provide supplemental services, and we do that. Public safety, sanitation, in our case, transportation. We run a free bus 7 days a week, about 8 hours a day, that almost 900,000 people rode last year. And that's all part of, I'd say, one of the three things that we do. So number one, we make daily life better now. We do it in traditional ways, we do it in untraditional ways, like our public art program on construction sites. Number two, the usual economic development work of a bid in unusual times. And by unusual times, I mean post 9/11. What do? We do marketing. We do research. We're the single largest source of original and synthesized research on Lower Manhattan. We do planning, and that ties into our third goal, which is to develop a vision of Lower Manhattan beyond the completion of the World Trade Center, although we think that's very important. Lower Manhattan is the first live-work community in the New World. Different than Jamestown, different than Plymouth. It's a place where people have always lived and worked. So what does that mean now? I think the word to describe Lower Manhattan at this juncture is sustainable. We are everything in 1 square mile. So as our signature industry, which is financial services, although a minority of our jobs, changes and our economy diversifies, what can we do to attract the next kind of business or businesses that are interested in 400 years of innovation? That's really what we are.
It's, we're getting to a close. You have 2 children.
I do.
Phoebe
and Julian.
And you spend a lot of time in the nonprofit areas also.
I do. I thought you were going to say on the ball fields. I do that too.
No, on the ball fields and the soccer fields, right? No question. But
we're a little iffy on the basketball court in the Kaufman household.
No? Bad pitching. So my question is, you're also in the municipal arts, you're in the Governor's Island project, so you keep yourself a little busy.
Well, why else live in New York?
I agree.
New York is a place where you can mix it up, where you can change life, where
you can't get your mother down here to move from Providence back to New York?
Well, she's very busy. She's got a very active career. She's involved too. This is a family tradition.
Right, but your brother is, he went over to Illinois, right? He's in Chicago.
He's in Chicago.
Right, which is another active and interesting city. So I'd say in your short life, because we will tell that you're going to be, and you're very proud, you're going to be 50 years of age. You've really accomplished a great deal. You've spent a lot of time living, operating, and being a New Yorker. And I'd like to thank you for being on Building New York today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Inc., New York's Window Company, Capital One Bank, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding for this program is made possible by grants from AVR Realty Company, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Beechwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman and Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, F.J. Siami Construction, Friedman LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors LLC, Investors Savings Bank, Jack JAFFA and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, M&T Bank, Marcus and MILLICHAP Real Estate Investment Services, Meridian Capital Group, The Moynihan Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans LLP, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling Inc., Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, The Wickoff Group.